All right, so Philip and I are actually walking through a tour of the new Six Flags Park in Qiddiya. It is gigantic. We would love to show you pictures, but we would be shot, fired, escorted out, which is fine. I totally understand that. But the most impactful thing to me is the fact that we are in a giant canyon. You have these great rock walls behind us. It is looks like a very large park. It is very much under construction. I don't know, just very first impression since we're actually recording this as we walk through. What do you think, Philip? What is your top 3 takeaways? I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, okay. Yeah, top 3 takeaways. Okay. I think that for Six Flags Park, I was shocked at how robust the offerings are, because we have, they have each land, has a sit-down table restaurant. There's quick service restaurants. We also have dark rides in it. So all the offerings are very robust, and the theming, I think those would be my things.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think the theming is really amazing. The fact that they have basically a central hub, and then multiple lands that come off from that central hub, which I think is really impactful and kind of unique for a Flags park. I realize Flags does do themed lands, but this seems far more. This is a step up. This is kind of similar to what happened. Well, quite honestly, what happened even with SeaWorld in Yas Island. I think they stepped up their game, and it is very clear that that's happening here as well. It's a construction zone. That's the thing that's most impactful to me, is that it's got a ways to go, I think. But we just came around the corner and are now looking up at the new tallest, fastest est coaster.
Yeah.
And
it's massive.
It's huge.
It's massive.
It's like you're falling off a mountain.
Yeah, I really do believe they're going to use the full queue for that.
I think they're going to use a full queue for that, but I think they're going to use a full queue for that. He said they only have an indoor queue set for 2 hours.
Yeah, and then I think talking about it, so it's an outdoor park, but they plan to be open later. And then also they have at least all the queue lines and the restaurant and the foods. Anywhere people seem to be waiting seems to be covered. So really it should
including the central hub, which I think is interesting. Yeah, Central Hub is in a giant tent. So we will see how well it does, but if their operating hours start at 4 and go until 1 or 2 in the morning, that's certainly something that is not only cultural, because the people in this part of the world are, as one of our tour guides said, it's like living with a bunch of owls, because they're all night dwellers. But it's also because of the heat, so that makes total sense. But I just wanted to capture a moment of us with some of the ambient noise in the back of us actually walking through. We are one of the first major public groups to get a chance to do this, so thank you to IAAPA for making that happen. And so anyway, now you get a little sense of what it's like. Since we can't take pictures, we at least talked about it. So that's our top reviews. We'll go into this in much greater depth in the show, but that's kind of our top thoughts and takeaways as we walk through Six Flags in Qiddiya City here in Saudi Arabia. So right now we're standing in Riyadh City, which is sort of like a, I don't know, how would you define Riyadh City?
Boulevard City.
Boulevard City. Sorry, did I say Riyadh City?
Yeah, you did.
Sorry, I'm oblivious.
We're in Riyadh at Boulevard City.
What Philip said.
Yes.
So how would you describe Boulevard City in comparison to other areas?
So we did Boulevard World, and then we took the cable car over to Boulevard City. And I think that, like you said earlier, that Boulevard World is kind of like a mix between Epcot and
Global Village in Dubai.
Global Village, yeah, and so it's like more temporary structures. But I really like Boulevard City, and the more I hear about it, it's just the idea. It's like a city walk, where they do have temporary buildings that change around, but they also have a lot of so they're able to bring in a lot of new things. Like they had a Detective Conan thing, they have Five Nights at Freddy's, and I was saying I think that's more what theme parks need to incorporate, actually, because it allows it to become like a public square, and then it allows them to be able to adjust according to what's happening. I mean, Detective Conan is huge right now. Like all these things are huge. Like I think it's that kind of stuff I think would invigorate life, into some of our
Well, and
areas.
even Boulevard World, which is more like a theme park, even there, and basically for those of you who've never been to Boulevard World is a they have different areas dedicated or representative of different parts of the world, and what's really interesting about that is even those are changeable. They change out. They're temporary. They last 3 or 4 seasons, or 2 to 3 seasons sometimes. They have some basic rides, but
it's all basic. Yeah, I think Boulevard World is the theme park, and then Boulevard City is the city walk, basically. But Boulevard World, I was shocked. I know Scott's been here before, but I was shocked at the detail of the quote unquote temporary infrastructure. I mean, honestly, I know if you go up and you inspect it, we can tell that it's not permanent fiberglass, but there's no way the guests are gonna know. And it looks gorgeous, and also each area is cinematic, right? There's views, there's vistas. It's they really thought about making sure that there's a picturesque moment in every land. And so in that way, I think it's a perfect, we were saying it was retailtainment on steroids, because there's so much retail and food, and then there's little performances, but you mainly just go to hang out and do those things, and then take pictures.
Right, and one of the things that they brought up is, they're trying to make certain that there is ease of access for even very large families, which is very common in this part of the world. So, if you have they basically have a low entry fee, and then have individual pricing for ticketing for each of the rides or attractions within the experience. So you can come and just hang out with your family and make it that town square that we were talking about, or you can actually do everything, and it's maybe you do everything on those special occasions, so you're there regularly, but it's kind of like they've right-sized their attractions industry to the attention span of their guests.
Yeah, it's only open for 6 months out of the year.
Well, that's because of heat mainly.
Yeah. And it's an evening element, so you come after work, I guess, and you stay until later, 1 in the morning.
It was described to me as we're in Riyadh, so we're living in a world of owls.
Yeah.
Everybody's attention span and the way they do things is all based on when it gets cool enough to come outside.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important. The other cool thing about the temporary nature of Boulevard World is they were saying that the basic structures are made of shipping containers, and then there's scenic, that is, they do the basic, what's going to hold the building up or what's going to hold the facade up, and then they do all the overlay is carved and coated foam, and sometimes it's coated in sometimes it's coated in hard coat, sometimes it's coated in concrete, but it's all very, we'll call it what we would call sort of temporarily permanent, permanently temporary, so that they can change it out as the whim or as the season desires. So
it honestly reminds me a lot of the haunted house mentality.
It is. That's very true, and especially the ones that are the ongoing haunts that want to change out something every season.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And they change it out. And it's that whole idea where, you're open for 6 months, and then it encourages people to come in to see what's new, and then everything is not, the cost up front isn't as bad, so you're able to make back the revenue. It was described to us as sustainable. And I think that's an excellent way of framing it. It's how do we make it sustainable? Because the metrics were 80% from the local city, from Riyadh, and 20% from Saudi. So no one's coming here for this. No one's coming from another country or from even outside of Saudi to see this, which means it has to be sustainable for the locals, and I think it is.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of the exact opposite business model that we experienced when we were touring Six Flags and Aqua Arabia in Qiddiya. Qiddiya is going to be a global destination.
Yeah.
It will be a reason to come to this part of the world. Boulevard World is not. But I can see that it would definitely kind of get a little halo effect when that starts to happen, because no one's going to come to Riyadh to see that. But if they're here, it's really fun.
Yeah.
And the vibe is such that you're going to bring your family, you're going to shop, you're going to eat, you're going to go see a couple shows. You may do 1 or 2 rides or attractions, and that's and then it's 2 o'clock and they close down the park.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way. I mean, I know that or at least it seems to me like there's some competition going on between these two entities in some way. But first of all, I think I understand the scale of Qiddiya City is all of Walt Disney World. So it's not like...
Well, the scale of Qiddiya City is all of Orlando.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I think our guests need to understand is Qiddiya City is not a theme park. Qiddiya City is a city.
It is literally, they're building the city to be an entertainment destination. They're planning on 500,000 people living there in addition to so there's going to be homes, there's going to be buildings, and so it's not just them building everything. They're bringing in people to build other businesses and make it, they need a full city. And they're extending the train, we found out last night.
Right.
They are extending the train stops. So you're going to be able to take the train directly from the airport to the Qiddiya City, which is going to be excellent for people flying in. And it's just a whole man-made construction. So, I think there's no reason for them to compete because, one, the scale is no way they're going to compete.
Nor is the audience.
Nor is the audience. It doesn't. And I don't think there's a reason to, because the thing is, you're never going to come to Riyadh for these boulevard areas.
Right.
But you're going to come to Riyadh for Qiddiya, and then hopefully what they can do is put up tour groups together and get buses to pick people up in Qiddiya and drive them over here. That's what I would recommend. I think that would do really well.
I think one of the things that's going to happen is in Qiddiya City they're going to have tours of Riyadh.
Yeah.
Because people are going to want to see the city of Riyadh, and they're going to want to come over here and experience what Riyadh has to offer. But I think that Boulevard City and Boulevard World are significantly more targeted to the locals, and I think Qiddiya City then will bring in people globally to make them aware of this exploding tourism industry in this part of the world.
Yeah, and it also makes sense to have the different contrasting views, because Scott talked last time about how Six Flags, they're trying to make Six Flags fit in Saudi, and in a way, I think, Aqua Arabia is different because it is, but it's still how do we make a water park fit here? And so it's also a different mindset in terms of this is shaping around the local culture is what this is. Mm-hmm. And that's we're trying to fit a thing into the culture.
Right.
So I do think that from even whatever North Star standpoint, they're different approaches.
Yeah, they're different business models, and they should be. And there's room for both of them. So I think we're getting a nice, unique sort of dim sum approach of the different approaches that are happening in this industry. But I will tell you, it's blowing up. So
yeah, and I think in the short term, though, I honestly do think in the short term that you're going to have an awkward period where Six Flags and Aqua Arabia open, and they're going to have less people than Boulevard City, because Boulevard City is at its peak. It's already 3 years in. They hit 30,000 people a day is what we were hearing, and I don't think that you're going to hit 30,000 at those places when they first open, because it's going to take a while. Because the subway stop isn't open yet. I mean, it's going to take a while for people to trickle into those areas.
Well, and this is happening in Abu Dhabi too. You have to hit critical mass before you can start.
That with WB. WB was so busy, but SeaWorld was still less busy. So.
Yep. So we're now standing in Boulevard City in Riyadh, and we have just recently completed our first session of education sessions here as part of the summit, and it was interesting because it was multiple speakers. They were back to back, and really, I mean, it was interesting to see the unique combination of people that they brought in, both from the region and from just outside the region. They brought in some European points of view, but it was nice to see that sort of regional focus, which is exactly what it should be here.
Yep.
But so Philip, what did you think overall? I mean, just sort of 30,000 feet. What did you think of the content and its intent? I mean, because I'll share with you I don't want to put you on the spot, so I'll share mine first. I thought that what we were listening to was things that there was nothing that was particularly revolutionary for me. It was great reinforcement, and as I was sitting there, I'm thinking, well, gosh, no, we've progressed further than this. But then I had this realization: in this market, we haven't. This is all new for an industry that didn't exist 2 years ago here in Saudi, and this information is very, very important for them to hear. And to be fair, it's still viable for people outside this region to be reinforced upon. But I think that all the information was good. I don't know necessarily whether I felt that all the information was progressive, but it was progressive for this market. I think that's the only fair way I can say it, because I don't want to say that anything was bad or wrong. It wasn't, but it was nothing that I hadn't heard in some form or another before. I don't know. How did you feel about that?
That's a really good description. I think I agree with all of that. I think, again, we talk about this a lot. I'm not sure who this was for. because the people that took your sessions, that you taught before this started, and the people who had the full summit, I don't think that we needed anything in that room except the very beginning, which I thought was great because the very beginning they gave us actual data. This is what people in the region want. This is what they're looking for. This is how many days. And then actually when I heard those data points, suddenly so much made sense to me. And about talking about how they're looking for residences for multiple food options and for things that last whole days or multiple days, and all these like you hear the survey data they got from the Saudi region, and then you're like, oh, and how young the population is and all this stuff, and you're like, oh, this makes sense. Like that we should have got maybe before the EDU tours, and that would have given us the context we needed to understand the venues we went to.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, it helped define the North Star. I mean, just to go back to my old terminology, it helped define the North Star so we could understand a little bit more about what it was. I also, though, think that even even Daryl's presentation, which was all basically about the importance of really good guest service.
Yeah.
But I think all that was, like I said, nothing particularly new, but solid. It was solid information, and it was solid information that the people in that room, if they hadn't heard before, needed to hear.
His presentation was, in my opinion, the best by far.
Yes, I agree. Well, it's also the most polished and most professional. It was the most
polished. It was engaging. He used good storytelling techniques.
Absolutely.
He told stories. He made it relevant. He got people moving their arms and energetic and engaged. It was by far the best 20 minutes. But I would say, though, everything else just seemed like, it's that weird mix where it's like, I'm not sure who it was supposed to be for, whether it was, I think Scott's point about it being maybe meant as like this could have been an introduction to tourism and themed entertainment course, basically.
But I think that's exactly what it was. Well, I really do. I think it's also the fact that...
Was that what it was marketed to us as, or what it was supposed to be,
Well, but I mean, to be completely fair, neither of us are the market for this. Neither of us are the market for this summit. We are not necessarily, we're going to be ancillary parts of the industry in this area, but we're not going to be the movers and shakers.
Well, I also think, in a paradoxical way, I also think that some of the topics, like the HR umbrella, it's like they kind of gave a really brief overview that almost you could read off of Wikipedia as like best practices. But the problem, I thought, was even though they were like basic principles, like HR, you should hire for attitude, not for skill, and all these things that I learned when I worked at Disney. But it's like each of these things could have been a module, and so there's no way they really realistically could have covered even the basics of training. Like, they go up there, and it's nice to just say, you need to hire for this and not for this. Okay, tell me how to do that. But they never answered that. And so I think the one that we just talked about, the guest satisfaction one, was the only one that connected the full circle and said, here's a practical story and a practical tip for each thing I'm going to share to you. But everyone else, and it was almost an impossible ask, right? How do you summarize all of HR hiring practices in 20 minutes? And also, it's a panel discussion with 3 people.
Well, but I've also gone back, and yes, I agree with you. I do agree with you. And those of you who have taken any sessions or seminars from me, you know that I always want to do theory then practice. Yeah. I mean, that's always something that's very important to me. But I think in this format, to your point, I'm not sure that would have been possible in 20 minutes.
Well, and then my argument would have been, what's the North Star for...
But I think the North Star for this is to whet your appetite. Because, like we've said, I think this is the beta test for Middle East Expo next year.
But then why couldn't this have been an online class?
Because it doesn't get people here. It doesn't give us the opportunity to do the eduteurs. It doesn't give us the opportunity to network and start to make those connections that we're all saying, hey, well, I see you in Abu Dhabi next year.
I think the people that were on the education tours probably didn't need these sessions, is what I would say, because the people, at least that we've been on the groups with the education tours, seemed a lot more experienced. That's why they were on the education tours. And they had separate tickets, right? We met a lot of people that are just the first time being here. So
well, and that may be exactly who these were targeting. It's not really for us. It's not really for the full. But as I think every speaker said, all of their topics are only going to work if they are implemented from the top down. So leadership needed to hear this, to hear what their frontline people were hearing or what their middle management was hearing, even though they already knew it, and just the optics of seeing, the owners of the parks and to seeing, the head of Europa Park and the head Jakob up there, and it was important for people to see them participating, so that it's not just here's information for you young startups. It's information that we all believe in.
Was there anything that we heard that, I don't know, was there anything that was not like you think at that introductory level? I mean, besides the introduction where they gave proprietary research about the Saudi.
See, and I felt even that was Googleable. I felt even that was something that you could find, online. But me, stats are stats. They're tools to accomplish something much greater. But
what about the keynote panel? Jakob was up there, but I think. Even in that, I think that they were just kind of overviewing.
Agreed. But I think that was the optics. I think that was what we were supposed to see. Because this is an industry that did not exist 2 years ago, and they have to. You can't. What's the old line? The biggest enemy to education is expertise. Yeah. So you have to be able to bring people in. You have to meet them where they are in order to elevate them to where they need to be.
I think if you viewed it from that lens, then maybe that's what we were supposed to get from it, is that we were supposed to get an understanding of where this market is.
I think that's, for us, I think that's probably right. So I now have a better understanding. Because, to be fair, when I walked out, I looked at Philip and I said, I feel like I just went in a time machine about
15 years?
10 to 15 years back. Because it's stuff that we've both heard and said. At the same time, let's get down off our high horse for a hot second and say, yeah, but these people haven't had that experience.
Yeah, especially like the HR stuff where you're like, well, you should hire for attitude, and you should,
Which I will say is very unique here. They're still very focused on what does your CV say, and that's revolutionary for some of the folks in this market.
I think maybe that is the point. Where they're like, all these things that we take for granted. We're like, hire for attitude. You should you should keep what you like and get rid of what you. All these, practicing skills, talking to your staff, making sure that you take care of your staff, they'll take care of your guests. Disney's been saying that for decades, but I think that's the point, is that they're just introducing these now to this market because this market is young enough that they're just starting to actually make career paths. They didn't even have career paths. We did learn that. We did learn they didn't have career paths for people. They didn't have anybody in the area that knew anything about tourism. Kids didn't want to work in the field. They had to send people off to UCF to get those 55 college students to learn and then come back and write benchmarks. So it is like a Wayback Machine, but maybe that's what we're supposed to take away, is we're like, they're just barely now understanding this. So when, in turn, if Scott and I were to work with these people, we can't take for granted that they care about their employees, or that, we have to come with almost like a beginner's mindset.
Right, and it was actually, in fairness, it was beneficial to me, since I'm writing content right now for some training classes that I'll be doing here later. I now have a better understanding of where the ducks are flying, at what level they're at, and at what level I can start the training, which is, and they tried very strongly when I was putting together the concept on the RFP. They said, now don't make it too childish. This is for middle management. But now I understand where middle management is, if this is the litmus test. Now, I'll be curious to see, and we'll find out over the next day or so, if those people in middle management felt that this was too remedial for them.
That will be interesting to ask. That will be interesting to ask. The one thing I was going to say to wrap up, I think my biggest takeaway from this is understanding where they are, but also, for me, understanding I don't need a dealer here. Because they're not at the point where they would be using my product yet in this stuff. They're not ready for it. They don't have the integrators or the talent. Like, all of their lighting integration people and all that stuff is going to come from somewhere else.
I was just going to say, it's going to get specced out in a design done by somebody in another country.
Yeah, because the talent's not here. The firms aren't here. Nothing's here. And I should probably be in the UAE, and I should just know that the UAE is going to be leading this area for a little bit, and if they need talent, they're going to get it from the UAE, and they're going to bring it here. And it will develop here eventually, and they're probably going to put offices into Qiddiya City, I imagine, but that's not happening now.
Well, and I would also say that I guess my takeaway from it is they are at this level, but they are going to skyrocket past this level very, very quickly, It's not going to take as long as it took in the U.S. to adapt some of these ideas, and because again, they have deep pockets, they have strong interest, and they're pulling from some of the best from around the world. So I think it's one of those, we may not need it today, but be prepped because it could happen as early as tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it will. That's with any technology and with anything like that. Just look at Halloween, when it jumped across to Asia, it jumped across already in its like commercial form, and it already jumped across as like a festival that's, all that's, and it took us decades to get to that model. And the same is true with all sorts of technology. That's why the infrastructure in a lot of newer areas, like the Dubai infrastructure, is so much better than the American infrastructure, because they learned from America. And I think that you're going to see that here. This is going to develop.
Their starting point is where we are now.
Because we're here to help them.
And they're hiring us to help them. So there's that. So that kind of keeps things in perspective. So I think that basically, I think what we're both saying is that the educational seminars, there was absolutely nothing wrong. It was a good, for those of us who have been through it in years, it was a good reinforcement, but it was also a really good reminder as to where the local market is when it comes to the attractions industry, and how quickly they can potentially grow if this is their baseline. So we'll see where it goes. And now the final education session is over. You're going off to go back to Boulevard World. I'm actually going back to the hotel and get ready to head back to Tampa. So in this last session, I think they touched on some really important points. Once again, they talked about staffing and how staffing is an ongoing challenge really around the world, and how it's going to be even more so here in Saudi because, again, the industry is relatively new. I guess the biggest takeaways for me is that the Saudi culture is looking for things that will integrate and represent the Saudi culture. I mean, that's just kind of the overarching theme over and over and over again. They need to, they're utilizing their relationships with outside contractors, outside companies, people from different parts of the world, but it has to come back and resonate with the Saudis. And I think we heard that over and over and over again when it comes to park development, when it comes to training, and basically taking what is inherently Saudi, which is the sense of welcoming and politeness and hospitality, and finding a way to make that leap from I'm being nice to I'm doing good actions for you as a member of the attractions industry. That's the thing that just kind of it keeps coming back over and over and over again in many different ways. There was also a presentation that I saw that I think unfortunately Philip missed, was on AI and the importance of that, and how that is going to be a part. It's not even a question of how it's going to be. It is going to be a part. It's not if, it's now. It's not when. It is happening as we speak and continuing to grow. And I found that the most interesting takeaway I found from that was how it's already here, and it's moving so quickly that the future is really hard to predict, because it's going to happen within the next year and a half. So it's going to be. That's going to be part of it. That's really going to be impactful. But you actually liked the globalization versus nationalization seminar. What did you take away from that one?
Yeah. I like that one. So how many were there today? There were 4.
Yes, there were 4 total.
Yeah, the introduction one, and then the globalization was second, then it was AI, and then the last one was like a recap, a kind of end cap for it. Yeah, and what I liked about that one, I thought, that there were I thought it was very complicated, but I think if I were to distill it down, essentially it's what we've been talking about forever, which is immersion, which is tying back to following the story and understanding the context that the guest is walking through. That's basically what it was. And the thing I thought was most interesting, though, was talking about the idea that it's a continuum. And it doesn't have to be all American, it doesn't have to be all the local culture, it can be somewhere in the middle. And I like the idea of using Disney to illustrate that, because we're all pretty familiar with it. So we understand, that Disney, that Main Street, but then we understand that, Shanghai, which is the newest one, didn't have a Main Street, right? I like that concept, and I think it's especially interesting in the context of what Scott just said. If everything has to come back to the local Saudi culture, but they also want to attract in outside visitors, then it's a continuum. And it's where on that line do we fall? How do we integrate the Saudi culture into something while it, so if we're, again, like the Six Flags, if we're going to bring Six Flags into Saudi, how much of that is Six Flags? How much of it is Saudi culture? Where is the line? And the thing is, it's a continuum and there's a sliding scale. And I think the way that a lot of these facilities we've seen have chosen to do that is a land approach, and by dedicating certain lands and certain aspects 100% to Saudi culture, and then trying to kind of have mixed zones. But even in the mixed zones, as he was saying with his Motion Gate example, was even with the How to Train Your Dragon, and then going in and saying, well, the food doesn't match because, well, they're trying to have Saudi food here because Saudi people want Saudi food. And I think that's a good question that he brought up on stage, which is like, he didn't bring it up, I'm bringing it up for him, which is in situations like that, you have a themed land that really should have the food from that culture, but that this is for Saudi people and Saudi want to be here and Saudi like Saudi food. Do you bring in outside food or do you keep it local?
Well, and it's funny because there was actually another session in there that I forgot to mention.
No,
and
we're so good at this.
I know we're so polished.
I even checked my notes and I didn't know.
Yeah, but it was the session on how to take an event and make it sustainable. So taking
well, there was a session. I must have missed that.
Yeah, you missed that one. But it was basically she did a lovely job. But it was basically how do you take something like the opening of the Olympics, which can last 3 to 4 hours, and make it something that is sustainable that people come back to month after month after month. And it was all pretty much the same thing. It was making the emotional connection.
Yeah.
But one of the things that she brought into it, and this is where it triggered that I forgot. Oh yeah, she was there. But the thing that I forgot was she mentioned the factor that you cannot ignore is it has to be economically sound. So if you have a situation, it does have to be economically sound, because otherwise it's a hobby, not a career. It's not a job. Well, but that's my point about the food, though. Yeah. If in Dubai, because and I do not want for a moment to say that Saudi culture and Dubai culture are the same. They are not. Yeah. They are very, very different, and they cannot be lumped together. But what I'm discovering is just in the people that I've met here, and I should explore this even more in the coming months, is even the culture between Riyadh and Jeddah are completely different, very, very different. But ultimately, they still have to sell food. Ultimately, they still have to make their F&B numbers. And so if salmon and Swedish meatballs aren't going to make as much as chicken fingers and burgers, then guess what they're going to sell?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something I think universally we can all identify with that type of thing. Your turkey leg example from lunch. There's you just gotta it doesn't matter if it's not spooky. It's it's gonna work. But I think also the big takeaway, Scott started this off by explaining some of the large context of the situation, and I think overall we're seeing a sector that is evolving so rapidly it's hard for me as an American to even comprehend. Where they had no cinema only 6 years ago, and now here where we are. And so they are going to evolve very quickly, but right now, it's still a little bit further. But I would say I got the impression from the morning session, the second session in the morning, about the government funding projects, where it's kind of like they were saying, initially the government is going to invest in this, but we want other individuals to come in, and the government's going to start taking a back seat. And I talked to some of the other attendees about that, and what I got was a little more nuanced picture, which is essentially outside investment does not want to come in right now because it's not a business decision right now.
It's not a proven commodity.
Yeah, and because right now you're going to compete against the government when they have endless money. And, even the talent. I was talking to some firms who will not put offices here because the government will poach those people and offer them 2 or 3 times as much to the same job, and they just can't compete. So I think at some point the government's going to have to, if the government wants outside people to come in and make it, they're going to need to pull back to allow competition to come in. And when competition comes in, it's to Scott's point. It's going to be business decisions at that point. And they did talk about that premise where basically they're we are setting up projects where foreign investors and foreign companies can come in and participate in those projects. But so like the government's like, we're going to make the sandbox and you come and play in our sandbox and we'll get out so that you can actually play.
Well, and there are a few exceptions to that. I mean, for example, Europa Park has already been brought in to start the whatever the theme park training university, whatever it is, the talent training, as have a couple of other big outside parks. And what's also happening internally, and I know this because of my work here, they're also they're also funding some of the local holding companies. So the local businesses are making money off of the government as opposed to sending all that government money outside of the country. So it is a land of great opportunity, but you know what? Just like the Wild Wild West, there's a lot of confusion still. Things have not settled, and I think that goes back to what Philip was saying as far as outside companies not willing to come in and make major investments here yet because the dust hasn't settled. Correct. They don't know quite what it is yet.
Yeah, and I would add to it too. I agree with all that. I just think I want to underscore that it's not every decision here right now is being based purely off of does it make money or not. You know, there's a lot. There's and I think that's the problem, is that we as a foreign entity would come in and be like, what's the business case? But it's like there are different rules here. The rules of the game are different here.
You cannot look at it, and we've said this to each other constantly, you cannot look at it from an American point of view. But I will say that even some of the folks who have been operating Boulevard City, which is where most of this has been taking place, and Boulevard World, have also said, when we were looking at some of the larger projects, how is this going to be sustainable? And Saudi needs to start thinking about This morning, for example, we toured a gigantic, beautiful, the world's largest indoor sports stadium.
Indoor stadium,
As far as seating capacity goes. But as Philip did some additional research, discovered that it wasn't really large enough to do to compete with the outdoor venues or some of the other. So
it's a perfect example. So there's this enormous indoor stadium. It initially 18,000 people. They expanded it to 27,000 so that it would be the world record holder for the largest seated indoor stadium. So you have this giant stadium, and the thing they wanted to do was to have real grass. So it has real grass you can play in all indoors. It's crazy. But then you have to think about it in the larger context. That's still like half the size of Wimbledon and some of the other places. So it's actually not big enough to attract some of the largest sports events. And so what does that leave you with? It leaves you with like a really good concert venue, but you have grass. So it ends up where you actually, in order to make it, again, sustainable, you're going to have to maybe cover the grass or kind of change that around. But that was like one of the original selling points, is that it was like a giant grass indoor thing. And so that's a great example of how they started initially to be like the biggest, the best of this thing. And then you're like, oh, well, maybe it isn't well positioned in this individual market.
I think the biggest challenge they're going to be facing is they have to find that balance between creating that great, big, exciting, sparkly thing, that big sparkly thing that's going to draw in attention from international guests, while still actually figuring out how do we right size for what we need. And that's going to be the sustainable issue. So hopefully the big mega projects like Qiddiya City are going to draw the attention, and then they will then start to focus in on how do we maintain. I mean, these are things that we've talked about with Dubai and Motion Gate and how, you know, and the Bollywood Park, which is now closed. They didn't exactly think it through. They didn't actually go to the final product. They should have reversed engineered a little bit more and thought, what do the guests really need? What can we really sustain, and build to that? That doesn't mean that you still can't create the biggest and best, but do it in a way that is sustainable, and that is far more challenging to find that balance than to just say we're going to be the biggest and the best. You know what I'm saying?
I got some insight on that, and I think this will crystallize everything for people here. You know, this is a lot of these venues also, just for context too. The entire population here is not like Saudi, right? You have a lot of workforce people, you have a lot of that. All this stuff is built only for Saudi nationals, and that's another reason why that culture thing is so important. And a lot of it I've been talking about, and the honest answer I'm getting is because those workers and the other people here don't get paid enough to even afford to go. And so it's really built for just one portion of the population and for foreigners, right? And so then you look at something like Bollywood, not enough Indian people can afford to go to it, and the Saudi people don't care enough about Indian culture to drive and go do that. And so that was one of those elements, like, oh, it wasn't sustainable because there wasn't enough people in the market that could afford that because XYZ. Even though if you look at the just pure numbers, how many Indians are here? Oh my God, there's so many of them. We need a whole theme park.
Well, that's UAE, but yeah, that was the
Is that there? Yes. But that's what I mean. Like the context of it. Like it's the same for these two regions where you have the working folks that don't make quite enough, but there's a huge population. And so who is it really for? It's for a subset of each population.
Well, and that's also why instead of doing the high ticket price that includes everything, the model of doing a low entry fee and then individual helps reduce the barrier of who can experience it and who can't. And it was explained to us the other day, families here in Saudi are traditionally larger. So if you've got a family of 8 and you have to pay $100 a day to come into a theme park, guess what? They're not going. But if you can do it so that you've got a cheaper entry gate, and then you can do on certain days do different things and add on, it makes it far more palatable and reasonable for larger families. So one more thing before we go, I think it's really important that we do point out that this is
that they have haunted houses here?
They do have haunted houses here, yes, they do. But I think it's important also to recognize part of the reason this is, I think, even more of a crapshoot is 63% of the population here is young, very young, very, very young. So there's a lot of...
And 70% of them are looking to do some repeat immersive experiences. So I thought was
exactly. So we can't necessarily look at the past data. We have to look at the current and future data.
And what do the kids want? I don't know, Scott. What do they? Get off my lawn.
I've never known what the kids want. Anyway, well, so we're wrapping up here in Riyadh. I strongly recommend, however, that if you'd like to hear us speak about this in a bit more, focused manner.
Is it focused, or is it just going to be unfiltered?
Well, I think unfiltered will probably be more focused than we are right now, because I'm still tired. I don't know about you, but I'm still tired. But anyway, what we're going to do in unfiltered is we're actually going to record that when we get back into the States, and when we can actually kind of digest and deep dive into all the things that we touched on while we were here. But I hope you've enjoyed our recap of the IAAPA Middle East Summit here in Riyadh. And this is Green Tagged Theme Park in 30, and we will see you all next week.